1974, Mr. Taylor was 85 years old.
Mr. Taylor, have you got a story for us this evening?
Yes, I was going to tell you a story about the trip to the opening of the memorial at Vimy Ridge. In 1936, Mom and I decided we'd take a trip over and attend. This ought to be off now, shouldn't it? Anyhow, there were 5 big vessels left Quebec and Montreal with 6,800 vets and their relations, some of them, aboard to go to France and see the opening of the memorial at Vimy Ridge. We went on the Mount Calm, a CPR boat, and after we'd been on the ocean a day or so, I noticed a little Japanese walking up and down. He always seemed to be alone and didn't seem to have any friends around there, so I spoke to him one day, and he was very friendly, and I found out that he was the representative for 53 Japanese who died in the First World War from Vancouver, and he was detailed for to go over and examine each one of the graves. And he told me this, so he and I became quite friendly, Mr. Haito. We got to France, to Belgium, and at Antwerp, and we disembarked, and then we headed out to the different graveyards. And the 5 of us from Princeton, Hedley, and Karamis, we were separated, and I didn't see them anymore till after, for several days anyhow. But of the 5 of us who left Hedley, Karamis, Princeton, and this chum of mine, who was my pal, Captain Packman, we stayed in the hotel, and the first graves that we visited we were in a 54 bus outfit, and as we got off, the drivers on each bus told everybody, now you must be back here in 20 minutes or you may be left here. Well, 20 minutes didn't give you much time for to go and see the graves or to find them. And immediately I thought about the little Jap. He had 53 graves that he had to visit. How in the world was he going to make it? However, we went around all the different graves, and all kept beautiful, you know, with climbing roses over each of the graves. And finally, when it was all over, I should tell you that we had a trip on Vimy Ridge, a picnic one day, and they gave us, each hotel gave us a lunchbox for to attend the picnic. This is going to be funny. And in this lunchbox at noontime, we ate our lunches, Mom and myself and the 2 kids. And I says, here, put a bottle of white wine in here. So, after we'd eaten part of our lunch, I opened this bottle of presumably white wine, and it turned out to be distilled water. So, which wasn't very nice, but the water level in France and most of the places is so near the surface that they've got to distill all water. Anyhow, we left Antwerp for the trip home. And on the trip back, I looked out for the little Mr. Haito, the Japanese, And he and I got acquainted again. I says, well, how in the world did you ever manage to visit 53 graves when you only had 20-minute stops at the different graveyards? Well, he says, that's what I was up against. So I decided, he said, to get a taxi, if possible, and go around on my own and do the best I could. So he hired a taxi, and it was a poor one, he said, because it didn't go very far before it broke down. So the fellow that was the driver, he an off-handed sort of a fellow, he says, you go into an establishment there and have a drink, and he says, I'll see what I can do about getting the car fixed. So he says, I went into this little pub and sat down, ordered a glass of wine, and he says, I was praying, he says, that things would turn out right for me. So, he says, while I was sitting there, another gentleman came into the bar, into the snug, and he says, do you mind if I sit down beside you? To the Jap. The Jap says, sure, sit down, what'll you have? Well, he had a glass of wine with me, and we got talking, and I told him what I was there for. And he says, you know, I had been praying right along that things would work out for me. And this man says, well, I happen to be in charge of all the graves in this district. And he says, I've got a little half-ton out here. If you care to come out with me, we'll go to the office, and I'll take you to every one of those graves. And he turned to me and he says, do you believe in prayer, Mr. Taylor? I says, I certainly do. Now, that's the story.
Mr. Taylor, I'd like to ask you a few questions. This evening, Austin and I are visiting in the home of Bob Taylor and his wife. What is your first name, Mrs. Taylor? What is your first name?
Annie.
Annie Taylor. Mr. Taylor, how old are you?
In 3 weeks' time, I'll be 86.
86. And Mrs. Taylor, how old are you?
84.
84. This evening, Mr. Taylor is telling us a few of his little stories, so I'd like to share them with you. Mr. Taylor, do you have another story for us?
Yes, I have a little story I think you'll be interested in. It's along the similar lines, but when I first came to Princeton, the English church was going pretty good in those days, and coming from England, I naturally attended the English church here and got very friendly with the parson. I was sidesman for several years. I also taught Sunday school for a while, much against my grain, but they told me I was doing all right. Anyway, Mr. Govia, the parson, every other Sunday he used to walk to Colmont to hold service in Colmont down the railway track. That was a 12-mile walk. He was a delightful chap and I loved him. Anyhow, on this Sunday morning it was snowing, and it was a rough, cold morning, and the snow suited me because I was going deer hunting. And I went out early and went into the Princeton Cafe, where I had my meals all the time at that time. I was running my own shop and we had the first Ford agency in town at that time, and we were very busy with one thing and another. Anyhow, Mr. Govia came into the restaurant and he looked pretty piqued. I says, how are you this morning, Mr. Govia? He says, I don't feel well a bit. And he says, I rather dread this walk to Colmont this morning. He says, I prayed that I might meet someone who had a car that might take me. And we went on with our breakfast, and shortly after that, who should walk in but old Pearlie Russell, who had the big store in town in those days. Anybody want to go to Colmont today? Mr. Govia turned to me, he says, Mr. Taylor, do you believe in prayer? I know you do. And he says, I got a ride to Colmont and a ride back home again. And I was very thankful about it. And that's the end of that story.
Mr. Taylor, the other afternoon when I visited with you, you told me a story that happened at your ranch, and I believe the name of your ranch was Pine Park. Would you like to give us a little history on your ranch and then tell us the story?
Well, for to try to introduce that story, I'd have to tell you that I didn't have any purebred cattle in the early days, but after I came back from overseas, I was over 4 years. When I came back, I had a little money, and five of us formed a little syndicate. The price of everything was going up, climbing, cattle were going up, sheep were going up, and everything along with it. So the Colonel Allen of the Forestry Department, Bud Thomas, the head of the road control, Bill Thomas, his brother, and myself, we formed a syndicate and we started speculating. We bought 776 sheep and paid $21 a head for bred ewes. You know what bred ewes are, do you? Sheep that were expected to have lambs in 6 or 8 months' time. We also bought 2 carloads of females, cattle, open cattle, not bred. And we started speculating. They arrived here in double-deck carloads from Calgary. Old Pearsall, first Pearsall, he went over and bought them for us, and he was a good man. He knew what he was doing. We let him come in a little on the side and stake them. Anyhow, when the sheep got here, 776 of them, and they were all bred, and some of them had already lambed in the boxcar. We lost quite a few lambs that way, but actually we did have 150% lamb crop after the good weather started. First of all, we had to feed them hay and grain, and it was an expensive deal till the end of April. However, we thought we were going to get higher prices again. But do you know what we sold them for that fall? The market bottom dropped out of cattle, it dropped out of sheep and everything pertaining to farming. We sold lambs for 6.5 cents a hundredweight, $6.50 a hundredweight, and we paid $21 a head going in. We sold ewes for $4.50 a hundredweight, and we paid $11 a hundredweight for them going in. So it looked like we were going to take quite a rap. And I said, well, I don't want to take a rap like that. The reason I was worried was that a brother of mine who was purser for the CPR down in Vancouver, when he found out what we're doing, he thought he'd like to put $1,000 into the deal. Well, he was going to lose quite a lot of his $1,000, and I didn't want to see that happen. So I undertook to go to Penticton and peddle those sheep. I bought the tail end of the sheep, the 76 head. We sold 700 head. And there were 76 left, and they offered to sell them for $8 a piece. I says, I'll take them myself, and I'll peddle them. You can believe it or not, I went over to Penticton. The first day I sold 150 quarters of mutton. They were fat as pigs. We'd weaned the lambs off them, you see, in October, and this was December. So I knocked at the wrong door in one house, and a big stout fellow opened the door in his shirt sleeves, and I said, would you be interested in buying a quarter or two of good mutton? I'll guarantee the quality. He says, where are you from? I said, I'm from Princeton, I'm a farmer, and I'm selling my own produce, my own sheep. He says, have you got a license? I said, no. Do I require one? I'm a farmer. He says, you better go down and see the chief. I happen to be a policeman. So I went down to the courthouse, and at that time, just after the war, all the majors and captains in the army, they were all getting nice big soft jobs, you remember. And this fellow with a wax mustache, and oh no, the barren brute, I told him who I was. Cost you $50. And he turned it back on me and walked into his private office. Left me standing in the outer office. I said, I put my finger, my thumb to my nose behind his back, and figured, well, you son of a sea cook, you're not going to get $50 out of me. I'm selling my own mutton. So anyhow, one of the houses I called at was a friend of mine, and I didn't know they lived there. And they invited me for lunch. So when I went down 12 o'clock for lunch, I told them what had happened. The husband says, I'll tell you what to do, Bob. You go and see old Sam Ball. He sells beef and cattle, anything at all in the farmland, and get him to deliver them for you. He's got a license. So which I did, and old Sam was glad to do it. I offered him 5% on the deal, or 10%, I forget what it was, but he handled the thing from then on. And we shipped them all over there, and I made a nice pot out of it at 33 and 36 cents a pound, which, if you figure it on the average 81 pounds each, those used it, and they were in lovely shape. So you can do your own figuring and see what we made out of it, but I was the only one that came out of that without going in the hole. That's that story. Well, you want me to tell you a story about a miracle. You had one about believing in prayer. Now I'm going to ask you if you believe in miracles, because I do, after what happened. This is what I call a bullfight story. Only I didn't have a toreador's outfit or anything like that, but on the Sunday on the farm we used to often have company, and along with them was always nearly every Sunday Mr. and Mrs. Stitt, the man who shared the bridge with me, one who bought that bridge, used to come down and have lunch with us. Well, after lunch, Billy was sitting out on the front porch in the sun, and snoozing, so I was all dressed up for Sunday, and I just took a walk down the field, right down the road where we hauled the hay over, and halfway down the first field, here was a length of barbed wire lying on the road. Now we'd been hauling hay over that road for several days, for quite a while, and this 12 or 14 foot length of barbed wire was brand new and as straight as a ribbon. There wasn't a bend or a kink in it, and it was lying right on the road, on the hay road. So I stopped and I thought, where in the world could that come from? My goodness, it's impossible for that thing to have been left there, because we've hauled hay over it for days and days, and it was straight as a ribbon, and the fence hadn't been fixed. It was a barbed wire fence and as good as gold. Where did that barbed wire come from? I could not figure that out. Anyhow, I picked it up and doubled it, and then I doubled it again, and I wrapped one of the ends around it, and I had it in my hand when I went into the field, the second field down, amongst me cattle, just for to kill time while Billy was having a bit of sleep. The bull was along with the cows, and he was an imported bull from Scotland. A beautiful bull. I'd never had any trouble with him up to then. And I went up to him and I scratched him under the tail, and he backed up and he snorted, and then he started digging holes in the ground with his front feet, and then he started ripping holes in the alfalfa with his horns. I knew it was time for me to get busy. And I had this wire in my hand. Who put that wire in my hand? Where did it come from? I say the Lord dropped it in from heaven or from some place, I don't know where. You can believe that or not, but I actually do still believe that I was rescued by God because I wasn't due to die yet, because there was no earthly chance for me to get out of that field until I conquered that bull. And he was getting so mad, I went after him then. I got just as mad as he did, and I went after that bull, and I lashed him, and I made him back up until his nose was red blood and his eyes were cut. And I still kept him going until I got him backed away from me a while from the fence. And then I tried to back up to the fence, but he started again, and I met him, and I fought that fellow for at least 20 minutes or more. It seemed like hours to me, but I must have been down there for about 20 minutes. He finally had had enough, and that bull weighed 2,600 weight. He was a big bull, and could he bounce on those feet of his, and he was so fat, I never thought he could move so fast. Anyhow, I finally conquered him. I managed to get back. I climbed over the fence. I didn't go to the gate. It was too far to the gate where I'd gone through into the field. I had all the cows in there, about 40 cows along with him. But he went off by himself and stood sulking, and he didn't follow me up anymore. He had plenty. Now you tell me where that barbed wire came from.
I think I know where it came from.